Welcome to the Anti-Architect Podcast. I am your host, Christian Giordano. As president and owner of the design firm Mancini Duffy, I am driven by a quest for learning and radically changing the industry. With this podcast, I'm hoping to improve the industry that I'm so passionate about by taking a critical look at how architects work through a variety of voices and shared experiences. Hello, Anti-Architect Podcast listeners. I'm excited to have Julia Gamolina as my guest here on the Anti-Architect Podcast. Julia is the founder and editor-in-chief of Madame Architect, an online magazine with a global audience aiming to shine a light on women working in the architecture industry and empower other women in the field. She founded the magazine when she was 27 years old in 2018. Julia has published over 200 interviews with women who have advanced in architecture. She publishes 10 stories each month centered around all types of women in the profession at all stages of their career. I first heard Julia on a panel discussion for She Builds Waves through my amazing partner and CFO, the one and only Bola Williams-Ali, who is also featured on Madame Architect. Julia is also the director of strategy at Trahan Architects, founded in 1992 in New Orleans, and they have offices here in New York and Atlanta as well. They do beautiful work around the globe. She is also the co-founding member of Brick and Wonder, a member of the Female Founder Collective, and communications co-chair of ULI, New York's Young Leaders Group. On June 22nd of this year, 2021, Julia launched Mr. Architect to shine a light on the importance of men in the conversation of transforming the industry. She launched it with 9 interviews with men, and she plans to continue expanding. Julia, I'm sure I missed something in the intro here because you do so much, but thank you for taking the time to be here.
You got it all, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a lot there. So, I love this quote that I found from you because it's in the spirit of what my wife and I say to our 2 daughters. And that is, no woman wants to be known as a woman in architecture. They just want to be known as architect. And to me, that speaks a lot. You know, that's sort of what we tell our daughters all the time, that girls can do anything boys can do and better. I truly believe that. And so before you started Madame Architect, who were the women architects that you admired?
Oh man, there were so many and still remain so many, but very early on in college at Cornell, I had 2 professors that kind of, planted the seeds for the whole thing. One of them is Caroline O'Donnell. She worked for Eisenman for a number of years. She's now a professor at Cornell, has her own practice. But she, let's see, how should I describe Caroline? Just the way she approached architecture, was so new and interesting and smart, a lot of new ideas and a lot of new takes. And I think she just kind of showed that you don't have to, just because you come from a certain background or just because you have a certain identity doesn't mean that going forward you can't set a certain precedent or put ideas into the world. So Caroline was huge. And then also this woman, Nina Friedman, she was the professor for professional practice and the internship kind of class we had at Cornell's New York City program. And she at the time was at Shigeru Bon, was kind of Shigeru's secret wing, if you will. And also, paved some of the same things for us, but was also a single mother and talked a lot about how she would integrate that identity into everything she did in architecture. And I think that was a huge precedent for me. Wow.
And so since starting the magazine, has that changed over the years in terms of the other female architects that you admire?
Yeah, I think with any career stage or any place that I've been in, I've always had mentors, but the mentors have changed throughout time, and they're all still my mentors in a way, and friends and people I look up to. But I think you need to be mentored in different ways, and based on different things, just depending on where you are. So early on in my career, my mentors were those kind of in professional practice, leading firms, and I wanted to know how they got there. Nowadays, it's a little bit different. I look up to a lot of women that are running media companies for obvious reasons. A lot of people that, use their architectural training and time in the industry to then go on and do something else. And, in tech, or I talk a lot about Kim Holden, who's now a postpartum and birth doula. So, people like this. Yeah.
Interesting. So I did a little bit of research. So according to the NCARB website, women make up about 17% of licensed architects in the United States. I would argue that's a little bit of a misleading statistic because there's interior designers, there's the marketing, graphics people, there's, accounting like we have here. But I don't get a sense from your interviews, and I've read most of them over the last few weeks, that you started this really to get more women into the profession. What was your vision for Madame Architect, and how has it evolved?
Yeah, at the beginning, I think it was just that, I kept hearing this refrain of where are all the women architects? And I kept thinking like, they're everywhere. I mean, granted, there have always, in my experiences, any firm I've worked for, classes I've taken, there have been less than men. But I've always encountered women. Some of my favorite professors have been women. And so that was really one thing. It was like, they are here. There are amazing women to look up to, amazing professionals to look up to, and let's shed a light on that. But the other thing too, the driving motivation, was just, we were really sold one version of an architect in school. This kind of soul genius designer wearing all black with the glasses. I mean, I don't think I need to paint a picture for our listeners because they're all familiar with it. But, as a young woman studying architecture, that was never something I related to for a multitude of reasons. And the other thing too is I always held a lot of other identities in addition to what I wanted to do in architecture. I mean, I've been a runner for a long time. Health is a huge thing for me because in architecture school, I was also pretty sick. And so I just knew that like the lifestyle of an architect, and again, the picture that we were painted for everything to do with how your life turns out if you are in this profession, just I knew wouldn't work for me. And so what really catalyzed Madame Architect, I think, is trying to find my way and trying to find an alternate way. And what I found is that there are like thousands of alternate ways. And that's been super, super inspiring and eye-opening. Yeah,
that's amazing. So how did you actually start the site? Is it you registered the .org and you just started writing?
Not really, not quite. There was a long lead up, to be honest. You could say the seeds for it were planted like early on in my school days when I was just going to my teachers who I saw as mother figures to guide me in the academic and professional realms. But once I graduated from architecture school, was new to New York City, didn't really have a lot of, my mentors were my professors, and I wasn't working for large firms. So that built-in system of mentorship that can exist, at a place that has a structured mentorship program, I wasn't finding that. So I just started getting out and about in the city and connecting with other women. I found this nonprofit Architects, started by Nina Friedman, a professor I had referenced. Mm-hmm. And that was really to bridge the academy and practice for women for the field, but also for women to support one another. Started going to a lot of those meetups, met some incredible mentors, started having conversations with them, and thought, I am benefiting so much from this and I would love to share it. That being said, I was also actively looking to integrate writing into my career because that is another identity I held all along, again, my schooling and even through architecture school, but just didn't see how I could integrate it into professional practice. And so, Architects, this nonprofit that I mentioned, had a blog, and I pitched to the editor-in-chief at the time, Sarah Rafson, what if I interview my mentors for this blog? She said, amazing, go ahead. And that's how it all started. So I did, some interviews kind of randomly. every few months. And then we decided to do a series where I could curate a group of women. And once that series was going, once it was launched, I just saw the incredible response that it had and how many people were excited about it. And also how much I personally loved everything about the process. So that when the series was coming to an end, I thought, oh my gosh, there's so much momentum. This really has critical mass. I can't possibly stop this. And that's when I registered the domain and launched madamarchitect.org. Yep.
That's great. That's great. And do you monetize the site at all, or is it?
No, I do not.
Okay.
We had an anniversary event that we did charge tickets for, and those all went to, the typical upkeep for Madam Architect for, the Squarespace domain and et cetera, because we had never had funding for that before. But other than that, we do not yet, but I do have plans to. Do
you have a sense of, your readership and how big and important it's become?
Yeah, definitely. I'm obsessed with our readership and who they are and who's visiting our site and from where. We have readership in over 100 countries, which was amazing to see. Places like I had an Instagram live recently to talk about our new launch with the interviews with men that we're calling Expanding the Conversation Now. And we had people join in from Libya and Morocco and Brazil. So that was amazing. Our readership is primarily millennial women. And I think just women in the profession that are getting going and still relatively early on and just seeing what their options are. But at the same time, we have a ton of students. We have a ton of new moms. And yeah, it's been amazing to watch it grow.
It is amazing. Congratulations on that. So if you had to pick one thing that frustrates you about other architects or even the profession, what would that be?
Oh man, it frustrates me about other architects. I mean, I'm one of them, so I'm sure a lot of people could say the same about me. I think architects, it's a double-edged sword in that, there's pros and cons to everything. No matter what you do and who you are, there's just consequences of that. But architects obviously are generalists, so they know a little bit about everything. And I think architects are very curious people, and so they want to know how a firm runs and what marketing does, business development, et cetera. But I think because architects are trained to know a little bit about everything, then when you really need expertise in something, it can be hard for architects to let go of not being the expert, maybe. And that's fine and completely understandable. But I think, there is that idea of the generalist and the consequences that identity has.
I like that answer. That's original to the. I've asked that question a lot. So
what have you heard?
That's a good one. Uh-huh. Well, a lot of it is, I think most of it in previous guests have surrounded about they don't know cost. They don't know how much anything costs, which also is very true.
Also very true. Yes.
But hey, those are details we worry about. So our audience would love to get to know you a little bit better. Can you tell us a little bit about growing up and your childhood?
Happy to, yeah. So I grew up, my childhood was spent in Russia, actually, in Siberia, in a city called Novosibirsk, which is very cosmopolitan. It's not far away in Siberia, up in the northeast. It's very central and actually very southern Russia, but it's called Novosibirsk. And it was a very cosmopolitan upbringing. I took the subway, the public realm in that city is really amazing. We had a really tight-knit family. And the thing that was really specific to my childhood in Russia, too, was we had a dacha, which I don't know if you're familiar with what a dacha is. It's a summer garden house. And, so many Russians have this, but it's essentially, again, a summer house, but it's on a big plot of land, and everyone has this plot of land, almost everyone, and has a garden around the house.
Okay.
So you just see these houses in the middle of all these gardens, and it's really amazing. So, my winters were spent in the city, very cold, lots of snow, yes. And then my summers were spent in this very idyllic kind of garden landscape, which was really amazing. But yeah, growing up in Russia was amazing. I also had a really dense childhood in that my parents just put me up for anything and everything. So, in addition to school, and I went to school in Russia up until through first grade. But in addition, I went to like an after school that was focused on performing arts. So I did dance and singing and some acting and it was a very, very dense existence.
Yeah, well, I can relate to that. My wife has my 2 daughters in pretty much everything that exists. There's no time. Every minute is packed, but it does create sort of a richer experience, and you get exposed to everything along the way. So what? When did you emigrate? Well, you didn't come to the United States. You went to Canada first, correct?
Correct.
What was the why did that happen?
I think my parents they always wanted to move to the States. It was a lot easier to get to the States as a Canadian, I think, at first. And then my mom, I think, got planted in her mind early on. I think she told me she had a boyfriend that like immigrated to Hungary or something like that. And so she always had this idea of, wow, you can leave and go do something else and maybe go on to something better. And so I think she just always wanted to see the world and live somewhere else. And I think, in Russia, it's not necessarily meritocracy. It can be very hard to make your way there. And, we didn't come from a family that was very well positioned for certain things. And so I think, that wanting to leave just for themselves and also coupled with wanting to give their children a better future was kind of the incentive for them. At least that's what they've told me.
Well, and so you all moved to Canada.
Yep.
Where in Canada?
In Toronto.
In Toronto. Okay. And how long were you there for?
I was there for 6 years. So grade 4, I skipped a bunch of grades, grade 4 through freshman year of high school. And then midway through freshman year of high school, a wonderful time to move. We moved to Colorado Springs.
Okay. Oh, Colorado Springs is great.
It is great.
Yeah. And so you end up finishing up high school in Colorado. How was that in terms of moving in the middle of high school?
Yeah, that part wasn't too bad. I had, just having moved around, and I had kind of learned how to make friends and how to make my way in new contexts. So that was okay. What shocked us at first was, again, in Russia, we grew up in a very cosmopolitan environment. In Canada as well, in Toronto, Colorado Springs is not a metropolis. It is very, car centric. When I remember the first day we arrived, my brother was, I think right around 2 years old at the time, maybe a little younger. And my mom and I wanted to take him out for a walk in the stroller. So we went out of our apartment complex and we're walking, and all these cars were passing by us, looking at us like, what are these guys doing? And eventually the sidewalk ended, and we learned that really you couldn't just get out and walk. You don't do that. So that was a huge, shock for us, but we got used to it. And it's in Colorado that I learned, that I it's in Colorado that I started running. I joined the cross country team, did things like whitewater rafting. And so it was a really good experience in that way, kind of the outdoors aspect. And
do you still run today?
I do run. I love it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you live in New York City?
I live on the Upper East Side. Okay. So Central Park, the proximity is amazing.
That's a great run. What is it about running that you love? And as a writer, I'm curious if there's a connection there.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, huge runner's high. I do get that. I grew up as a dancer. And I did ballroom dance for a long time. Very typical thing for, I think, a young Russian girl to do. And running kind of gets me in that same mentality. I think it's very rhythmic and very fast paced. And for me, just especially nowadays with Trahan, with my work at Trahan and with Madam Architect, it's a huge brain break. Yeah. And a nice, way to kind of get myself moving, because if I didn't do that, I would just be in front of a screen all day, every day. Yep. But I do really love it.
I find the same thing. So I do a lot of running as well. And I've actually recently started taking a small little digital tape recorder with me, like it's not called tape recorder, just a recorder. Wow. There's no tape in it, obviously. And I find the same thing. I find I have a lot of really good ideas as I'm running, but I always forget them by the time I'm back, or most of the time. But I do find it very therapeutic as well, right? It's the only break for me from work, right? Aside from like family and kid things, just to kind of get away for an hour to do that. You can really clear your mind or free your mind in a sense.
That's exactly it. And what I've been doing, on the days when, I work a full day at Trahan and then I go home and do Madam Architect things, I've started to commute by running. So I'll run from the office up the west side, up the Hudson River, through the west side, through the park, and then back home. So it is a really nice break.
So take us through your education at Cornell. Is that ultimately what also brings you to New York?
I think it is. I always wanted to be in New York. So I think that was a good, path there. Also, it was a great architecture program. So that's why I had sort of my eyes set on it when I was in high school. But yep, I did the 5-year BArch, super rigorous. I was always very well-rounded in high school. I don't think I had a favorite class. I liked the variety of everything and using different parts of my brain. I mean, yes, I loved the art and the math, and those were kind of my my higher level electives in the IB program that I did. But at the same time, I loved history and writing. I spent a ton of time doing essays, which I now realize really planted the seeds for a lot of other things. But yeah, I found that in architecture school, and I don't think this is specific to Cornell, I think this is just the nature of, a concentrated architecture program, I felt really boxed in, surprisingly, because architecture is this whole brain field and you are learning a lot of things, but I really had to put some parts of me aside during the program. And I'll never forget this one moment. So I joined the running club at Cornell, and it started at 4:30 p.m. This casual running group, and studio ran until 4:20. So my freshman year at 4:20 on the dot, I would run out, change to my running clothes, try to go to this running group and, go for my run, and then go to dinner and then go back to studio. And you wouldn't believe the looks that I got running out of studio right at 4:20 on the dot. And so that fell away very quickly. And I stopped running with the group. I ran recreationally on my own, but I just remember thinking, to the professors too, just, this is a kid who's going out to do something good for herself, for her mind, for probably the work she would produce. And you're not encouraging that. And that was always really, really strange to me. Yeah. And
that translates directly into our profession, right?
100%.
I mean, those that, leave on time, we're always looked at as, and that was me. I always try to make a separation between work and play, let's call it, for all intents and purposes. And I remember there was a firm I worked at where you actually had to write in the time that you got in and write in the time that you left.
I had that too.
And when I started noticing is all right, if I left at 6:30, there'd be 20 other people in front of me that would write down that they left at 9:30 at night, and I'm like, everybody's lying here. This is all what kind of culture are you trying to create with this, bizarre. But so going back to the studio system, and I find it fascinating your talk about starchitects, right? And how you didn't fit in that image. And as you were talking about that, I think about it a lot, right? The education system does, in fact, kind of set you up to want to be a starchitect.
100%.
That's kind of all you talk about. That's what you study. You study the great masters and all this stuff, right? And I'm not saying that it's not important or valid, and it certainly is. But what is it? 99.99% don't become starchitects, right? They end up going and they work in either as your sole practitioners or in corporate firms, and you're almost setting yourself up or setting those up for disappointment ultimately in their own. So what are some thoughts that you have, and especially in context of women in architecture, of how we could change that education system?
Yeah, well, that's exactly why Madam Architect started. I think our way to change it is to show other examples and other paths, other possibilities. There are so many options out there and that work for different people. And the people that we studied that became starchitects, I mean, they had so many things in common. I mean, I think wealth is a huge part of it, and how many people, have access to that. I certainly didn't. And I just always knew for myself that there were certain things, never say never. I also really don't believe in the thinking of I'll never have that, because that also sets you up for, for something that maybe you didn't need to set yourself up for. But I just think, considering all the different backgrounds people have and the different foundations, and then all the possibilities that are available to them, there just needed to be a lot more cross-referencing, if you will.
Yeah, and you touched on it. It's and I don't know what the statistics are for starchitects, let's say, but they kind of start on third base, right? They have either family money or for whatever reason they have money, and listen, good for them. But it's a lot easier to be selective or do competitions or, be in a certain social network when you don't have to worry about your next paycheck. And you can take experiments architecturally and you don't have to comply and work as part of a firm. So I totally agree. And it's something that to me has to change, just the overall perception of it.
Yeah.
And I agree. Your magazine is certainly doing that for sure. You must have had a passion for writing early on. How did that come to be?
Oh gosh, I talk about drawing a lot because it's such a natural parallel to, or natural kind of lead up to studying architecture. But the writing, I wrote a lot as a kid, and it was always both. It was always the image and the word. And just as much as I drew, I would like write short stories. I would write children's books. I think for my parents' first Christmas gift in Canada, I wrote a story, like a short novel about a family immigrating, and so that was always part of me. And I journaled a lot. And I journaled a lot also when I first got to the city and was kind of trying to find my place in the industry and in the city and, who I wanted to be and all of that. So it was just a huge way for me to think through things and, express myself, but really to think through things. So I definitely knew I wanted to keep doing more of it and make it a part of my professional identity too.
And so what was your first job out of school?
I worked for Studio V Architects here in New York on Park Avenue, and that was for about 2 years. And then I had worked for a number of different offices in different capacities. Okay,
and how was that experience in the various offices?
Yeah, it's very varied, very varied in various offices. I feel like I've really seen a lot of different things. I mean, I've worked for an intern for firms as small as 5 people. The biggest firm I've worked for was FX Collaborative, which is, over 100. Different experiences. I think the thing that shapes your experience the most is who you're directly working with and reporting to, your manager and also your team. And I've had experiences that run the gamut. I've had amazing male and female managers and people I've reported to. I've had some not so great ones. And I think you just learn, that relationship is really, really important. And it's hard to plan for because you don't know who you're going to get. But that's why I recommend that when someone is interviewing at a firm to try and get some FaceTime with the person you'll actually be working with. Yeah. And of course, that's different because you might be floating around on projects or they might not even yet know. But as much as you can, I would recommend that.
Yeah. And so it's funny here at our firm, I used to want to be in every interview. Mm-hmm. And I think for that, first of all, that wasn't fair to the others, doing the actual working with everyone. And why should I have, be the one say, yes, hire this person or not. And once we started doing that, we actually ended up with, to me, a more cohesive staff, mm-hmm. right? And it is exactly that. It's those that are going to be working directly with their team. And we kind of broke teams down into smaller pieces. And it certainly is much more. So at Trahan Architects, what's your role there?
Sure. So my role is director of strategy, which means different things for different firms. I think someone that has a strategy role at a firm, really their role is to do what needs to be done to take the firm to where it wants to be, which is super vague, I know. But what it means in the case of Trahan is when I first joined late in 2019, Trahan Architects was a really established regional firm in the South in Louisiana. We were working, in Georgia, in Texas, in the Southeast. And when Trey and I first met, there wasn't a role to fill. There wasn't a director of strategy that he wanted to find. He just said to me, this is where I'd like to take the firm. I would really love the firm to be nationally, working nationally, internationally, to make sure we're able to connect with these folks, partner with these companies, and how do I do that? And I said, well, that is really a strategy operation. That's a strategic problem, not a problem, but something to solve and to think about. And so that's where the title came from. And the reason I was able to kind of help Trey in this particular regard is because I had, collected a number of experiences within offices that were in these different departments. So design, I focused on project design for the first half of my career so far, and then did a number of things in communications and PR and business development and marketing and some of the RFP pursuits. And that all combined along with getting Madam Architects started and building that entity and kind of building momentum and hype around it. I think all of that mixed together, positioned me well for this strategic initiative that Trahan was looking to do. So
is it also business development? You're essentially looking for clients as well?
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. So when do you say to them ahead of time, like, oh, by the way, I have this global reach with this online magazine that I've started, and what was their reaction?
Trey knew. Trey already knew about Madam Architect. I think that was a big part of the appeal, and the global reach aspect, but just having built something like that, there's obviously lessons learned from that. And Trey just really saw that. I mean, we are both founders, right? We're both entrepreneurs. And so we've been able to connect on that. And he just really gets it. I don't think everyone gets it, I have to say, but he did and still does. So it's been a great partnership in that way.
That's great that he gets it. And I agree. I mean, and I think you know this from our firm here at Mancini Duffy. We, I love when people have some sort of outside passion, and we look for that. I mean, that is because to me, if you can make time for your outside passion, you're certainly going to make time for your, let's call it your day job, right? And they both ultimately equal each other out, and it just shows, above and beyond any other initiative. So I'm always saying to people here, what do you want to do? What else could we do? And that's how we've started all these other aspects of our company. Some that almost have nothing to do with what we do, right? It's and we have so many cool ideas of things out there.
Right. Well, Trey talks about it in terms of self-motivation, and that was a big thing for him because nobody asked me to do Madam Architect. This wasn't an assignment I was given. There's no pats on the back. I mean, there are very nice things people say about it, and it's extremely rewarding in terms of the response it gets. But ultimately, it was very self-driven, and I think that was appealing for him. Yeah.
Very cool. So I think this next question is important for men in our profession to hear. Have you faced any challenges because of your gender in terms of your career growth?
I'm sure I have. To be completely honest, any challenges I've faced in that category have been to do with age. Okay. And it's probably a combination of both gender and age, but things that have been said to me or any sort of challenges or lack of progress that I felt, I think have been with, paying dues or not enough tenure or things like this. I hope Madam Architect is a good example that age should not be a barrier to, make impact or to have great ideas. But yeah, I think the biggest challenges have been both a combination of gender and age so far.
Okay. Yeah. Listen, I agree. Just because you're young doesn't mean you can't do the job of someone with 30 years of experience. So, and listen, this is a profession where the more experience you get, the better you become at it. But it still doesn't negate you from being able to step up to the plate early on.
For sure. And I think also we think about in terms of like professional experience, like for an architect, it's the making of buildings, but we sometimes put aside or maybe make less secondary life experience, right? Like what kind of experience can someone offer that's moved around and has gotten to know people all over the world or that really enjoys writing? And I'm not just talking about myself, but in general, like anything that's a unique combination of elements or skills that a person has should all be kind of propelled forward, I think, in the way that would be best for a company. And that doesn't always have to do with experience. So that being said, experience is super crucial. You just need both. I really believe that you need both. Yeah,
but diverse experience is good. I mean, we have people here on staff that have worked, at a millworking company or have worked for a furniture company. And they bring that experience and that, sort of expertise along the way. And I think it helps grow the firm in general. So
for sure.
So what interviews on Madam Architect do you think are the most impactful for men to listen to?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you for asking. For men to listen to, definitely Kim Holden's, who was one of the founding partners of Shop, is still one of the founders of Shop, has now moved on to be a doula, like I mentioned. And she talks about it, she put it very well. She says, these are not women's issues. These are society's issues. These issues are about family, about community, and that involves both men and women. So I highly recommend for everyone to read that. I think Farshid Musavi's interview is really amazing. She was working with her partner and in both work and life, and then the split, and so many people, men and women, go through various partnership splits in business and in life, and that is something that's very universal. I'm finding that all the main themes that come out of these interviews are universal. They're not specific to gender. They shouldn't be specific to just women, and that is exactly why we started our new series, our Expanding the Conversation series, because everyone needs to be having these conversations. We're all in it together and for each other and supporting each other, and I think that's been really wonderful for the platform.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is the Next Gen series that's also on your site?
Yes, it's about students and recent graduates. Okay. And we started that in the pandemic, actually, because we just saw the anxiety that so many students were having, graduating into this really kind of unprecedented situation. And we wanted to find a way to celebrate these students and let them know that they are crucial to the industry, and, fresh thinking and everything that they're learning now too will set the stage for what the profession will be, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So you certainly can't discount, what they're thinking and their ideas for the industry. And so that's a huge column for us and very successful. And
yeah, it's interesting. And I was looking through it. First of all, everybody looks so young. I mean, I thought they were like my daughter's age in middle school. Some of those.
Some are freshmen in college and architecture school.
Yeah, absolutely. And just thinking, I mean, maybe it's something you can even go even younger. I'm curious as to, where my daughter wants to be an architect, right? And so what does that really mean? And what are her, I always find it fascinating, even she knows what I do, but I always find it fascinating to hear what she thinks, the profession is about, which is always exciting. So, so do you have help with the site as well? Because how do you accomplish your day job and your your night job and everything else?
Yeah, it's always evolving. It's always a work in progress. I do have help 100%. And so I would say for the first year and a half, maybe I was doing it on my own, and that was just extremely unsustainable. I mean, it was early mornings and late nights and a lot, but I also didn't feel like I could ask for help for a long time because we don't monetize, we're all on a volunteer basis. And so what I did at the beginning, actually what I still do, is it's everyone who writes to me that says, I'd really like to contribute, put me to work. And so the first person that did that was this amazing architect, Amy Stone. She's based in Atlanta, Georgia, and she saw me speak at a conference for women in design at Harvard. And Georgia Tech's Equity and Architecture group came up. A lot of other student groups came up. I presented on Madam Architect. That was actually the first time I presented on it. And, 6 months later, I just get an email from Amy that says, hey, love what you're about, love Madam Architect, saw you speak, want to work together, put me to work. So that she was our first. And then there've been a series of, editors. We now have, 2 senior editors, Amy and Gail Kutat, who's at Silman. We have editorial assistants who help with transcripts, and then we have columnists that add, different perspectives to our site. So we have a historical columnist that does her own pieces, a columnist on city life, Nina Cook-John. We have a critic. So it's expanded in that way. But for the interviews itself, Amy and Gail are now doing their own interviews. They started transcribing the interviews that I was doing just to really absorb the tone that I wanted to bring to this endeavor. I think that's really crucial for you, not only to hear the questions we're asking, but also just the motivation and the energy behind those questions. And once they had a few of those under their belt, they're now out there doing their own interviews. And I just love the idea of, women interviewing women, architects interviewing architects, and just keeping that cycle going.
And it's voluntary?
It's all voluntary.
Yeah, everybody. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. I have to, I always make sure that they know that and they're okay with that. But, it's what I do. And
it's a passion project.
It's a passion project. But the goal, eventually the goal is to monetize partially. I always stayed away from, for a long time, I was really hesitant to monetize it because I thought that if I did, my decisions for the editorial, for the heart of the piece, would be influenced by something other than the content. But what I've realized actually is when you monetize, you can do so much more. You have the resources to do even more. And I also do really want to make sure that I am rewarding, everyone that has helped in Madam Architect. And so there's a big driver to monetize for that.
Okay. And what are the future plans?
They're being explored now. I'm trying to do as much research as I can. I'm talking to a lot of people. I'm looking at some continuing education, perhaps. So stay tuned. I just really don't even know myself yet what the best venue forward will be.
Is this something at some point you see ever becoming a full-time job for you?
I don't know. I love having both right now because I think it's really crucial for me to stay engaged in professional practice and stay in the trenches in a way, and be putting my money where my mouth is. And in some ways, I don't feel good about the fact that I would be this figure that's saying, this is what I want the profession to look like, and these are the women to look up to, and yet I'm not kind of contributing myself and setting the example. So for now, I really like having both.
So in your opinion, what do architects do well and what do they do wrong?
What do they do well? I think this is the same theme of the generalist idea. I think architects are very curious, very omnivorous in that way. And I think what they do well is making sure they have an understanding at least of all the different components of something, whether it be a project or a business or their client's organization. What they do wrong, gosh, yeah, a lot of architects have a hard time letting go, I think, of some of these areas. And I think delegation and collaboration are to continue to be celebrated. And I also think, architects, a lot of marketing support in firms can sometimes seem as secondary, and it's absolutely not. I mean, the marketing department, the business development department really sets the tone for the future of the firm. And the truth is, an architecture office is an ecosystem, and everyone, you all need each other. You need someone to be doing amazing work. You need someone to be finding amazing projects. You need someone that's telling a really compelling story about them. And the health of all of those different aspects depends on the others. So that's maybe something I think architects could do a better job at is, trust the experts, trust the people with MBAs and with, degrees in writing, and let them do their thing and just all work together. You've
worked at, a number of firms. Do you think that the actual business model for architects needs to change?
100%. I think the hours and the pay and the fees, definitely needs to change. I just think that the forces that influence that are so far beyond architects, the profession. I mean, you're talking about not only the developers, but also, the financing of projects from the developer standpoint. And that's just a really huge ecosystem. And I think I'm just now, touching the tip of the iceberg on what it all comes down to. But yes, it's big. It's a big.
The fees are, listen, you're always, it is kind of a race to the bottom as far as fees go. Yep. Some developers, some clients, they get it. They understand that if we pay a little bit more for this, I'm going to get X more, and therefore I'll save money in the long run. Mm-hmm. But most don't. And most will look and find someone ultimately that'll do it for cheaper. Mm-hmm. It's a tough model. And we have ideas here about how to change that, subscription services, things like that. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's ways of having sort of recurring revenue that ultimately give you the freedom down the road to do things. But it's a tough model. It really is.
Yeah.
And I think you see other kind of companies that always think they can do in-house architecture, and it all just falls apart for them. Like a WeWork, you bring in an architect and, they think they can do it, and they can. It's a special skill we have.
It's a very specialized. Yeah, 100%.
It's funny. So this next question, I hesitate to ask it because I don't want it to come across as like the man,
please,
giving the woman, permission kind of thing. But, what can men do to support or champion women in architecture? Not that you need us.
Sure. No, but everyone needs everyone. It's the same idea of, the ecosystem of a firm, of everyone working together and having, different focuses. And I think it's the same in terms of gender too. But, better to support. So I did an interview with Google's Ryan Trinidad for the Expanding the Conversation series, and he put it very, very well. I think giving credit where credit is due is very important. If someone has a great idea, someone does something well, just to make sure to acknowledge that and to celebrate it and take a moment to highlight it is huge for everyone at the firm, man, woman, other gender, and also in terms of age. And I think using language, making sure not to use gendered language. So Ryan gave a really great example of, at Google, they were talking about something, and instead of saying something they needed to get done, and instead of saying, oh, we should, find a guy to do this, it's like, well, what makes you think that the expert in getting this done would be a male? Maybe it's a woman. And so instead of saying like, bye guys, hey guys, all right guys, let's do this, hi everyone, hey y'all, what's everyone up to?
And I'm going to take that advice because I use hi guys all the time.
I do too. I need to watch myself too. It's men and women all do. But the other thing I think is giving the credit. And making sure everyone has a chance to speak. So often in meetings, I still see this. I see people bulldoze through other people trying to chime in. And I think being really attentive and saying, hey, you seem like you had a thought there. Like, what would you like to share? It's tough, and it takes real behavioral practice. Like, you just have to repeat these behaviors over and over. It's, it's not going to happen just because you thought of it or, it's something you should do. But just being conscious and holding yourself accountable is key.
Yeah. From a diversity perspective, what does the future of the architecture profession look like to you?
Oh man, from a diversity perspective, I'm seeing so many amazing collaboratives come together that are being very intentional about not even diversity in terms of race or gender, but expertise, origin, background, age. And I think some of these collectives that we're seeing are going to be really fruitful for the profession, really productive. Like, Design Advocates is a collective that started during the pandemic that I think is really successful in setting the tone for what that could look like. And yeah, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more collaborative models of interdisciplinary designers and professionals. Sure.
I agree. So when COVID hit, I'm curious as to, post-COVID, as you've interviewed more women, how has that affected them? Because I look at my own example, right? And we have a firm here of, 75 plus people. And, I immediately in COVID went into preservation mode. How are we going to keep all these people employed? And I'm proud to say we did. And, how do we kind of, get through this? And my wife, who also owns her own business, but she's a sole practitioner and she's in the furniture world. Everything for the kids fell to her. And honestly, it's better off that way. I wouldn't be very good as the teacher.
Well, you don't know that. You'd be good at other things, right?
That's true. No, listen, yeah. We did, I did my own version of summer school.
There you go.
Where we did, things like how to build a house kind of stuff, using models around our neighborhood being built.
There you go.
But in general, I feel like, and I know also from here, from our on Ebola, plenty of the other working mothers here, it all fell to them. Yeah. So I'm curious. And then, so what is it like? How have the interviews been since? And then how do you see it kind of coming around and back out of this?
Sure. Yeah. Well, caregivers for sure took a hard hit during the pandemic. And that's, men and women alike. I know a number of single fathers that also very much felt that. I mean, that I think exists a little bit less than things falling to women. But everyone that I've talked to during and since the pandemic has acknowledged it. I think the biggest thing just all around was the uncertainty. Just what does this mean for my life, for work? Where do we go from here? And I was talking to Kirsten Ring Murray at Olson Kundig, and she said, we won't really feel the repercussions of the pandemic until a few years out, because we're now soaking it all in, and how that'll manifest in our behaviors, we don't yet know. But people know that it's had a big impact. People know that there is no going back to normal. There is only this, cumulative normal. It's all accumulation of experiences. Yeah. And I think everyone is just is really self-aware now, and very self-aware of their colleagues, and are able to empathize more. I mean, seeing people's homes on Zoom and their kids coming up and dogs. And in my case, my mom and brother who I quarantined with, I think just opened everyone's eyes to the different ways of living now, of different families that exist, the different combination of people that you can be living with. I don't know. I think what do I want to say about this? I think everyone's eyes are just really open to their not being one way. And that's very healthy.
Yeah, and it's new territory, and you did get a window into people's lives, and I think ultimately for the better. You humanize. So I think that people here in our own firm, again using this as an example, they knew some of the working mothers here that left early, or had certain schedules that varied, and we've always been very, very flexible about that. And because my own wife works, so I get why it's important. But I think probably the younger generation didn't really understand, why does that person leave at this time? Why do they work from home on Fridays? Things like that. And I think we now all realize, like, we're all in this together. This is just another way of working in another part of life. And I think in the end, it's gonna be beneficial to even the office culture in the office as well as outside of the office.
Yeah. Well, I used to talk about this a lot when I was first coming up in the industry, because, the way we had work set up was very, outdated, because the 9-to-5 model, the office model, was all based on when there was kind of a couple, and it was divide and conquer, and someone was in charge of the household and someone was in charge of, bringing in resources to that household through means of work. Right. Now people are, like in my case, I lived by myself for a long time. And so, what happens when my super needs to come in and do repairs, right? I don't have a partner to lean on to take care of that, or, just like getting groceries and doing laundry and all this stuff. I mean, yes, you do that on a weekend, but there's just some things around life and living by yourself and being in charge of your own household and your own work that you have to do. And so I remember thinking like the 9-to-5 thing doesn't work. It does not work for a modern professional in this world because they do not have a guaranteed, someone to rely on to take care of everything else in their lives. And I think the pandemic has definitely accelerated that thinking for a lot of people.
For sure. So what opportunities do you see for technology in the architecture field?
Oh man, I think you guys are kind of spearheading the charge on this with VR. I think I think VR is going to be really huge. I'm reading this amazing book called Quantum Marketing right now that Kiera, who's the director of PR at Olsen Kundig, also recommended to me. Quantum marketing, it's basically saying how we're about to enter a new stage of marketing. First there was kind of the advertising of services, then there was advertising with an emotional connection, then there was the internet and digital advertising, and then there was social media. And now what is that fifth frontier, if you will? And, they're talking about VR, they're talking about social media changing super quickly. And so I think we just really need to be paying attention to all of these things. I think this actually goes back to something maybe architects don't do well. It is, the topic of architecture is what architects study obsessively, the theory behind it, what everyone's doing. I think we need to be just as obsessive with what's going on in the world at large and, developments and, space travel is on everyone's minds now with, Richard Branson's flight and Jeff Bezos's upcoming flight, and pay attention to that. There's going to be architectural and design opportunities within all of that and space exploration. And I mean, I'm thinking like way, many years ahead, but don't be afraid to be futuristic in your thinking in that regard. I think.
Absolutely. Even currency and Bitcoin and blockchain. Yes. I mean, these are all things that at some point are going to catch up with our industry, and we have to be able to embrace them in some way. So, so bringing it all back around, if you had to do it differently as far as your career, what might you have changed?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm in a good place, so I don't know if I would do anything differently, but what I would tell my younger self, I guess, is that insecurity is a waste of time. I think there's so many things that people waffle on or, take time to make some decisions because they're unsure. And at the same time, waffling and that kind of procrastination is good because I think you make sure you get all the information that you need and you really let concepts and ideas soak. And so that's productive. But I think there are some things that if I had just decided earlier or hadn't been, timid about certain things, it could have been more efficient and productive. But again, that being said, I think some of the times where I have taken time to do all my research and gather all the information and talk to experts has been good. So I don't know, just insecurity is a waste of time.
I like that. Yeah. All right. That's a great way to end it. So Julia, thank you so much for being my guest here. I don't know if you realize the tremendous excitement. There's a lot of people here in the office that were very excited that you were coming here.
Oh, really?
You're an inspiration in our industry. So, you have a lot to be proud of. So, and I thank you for your time here. So, to see and read more about Julia, go to madamearchitect.org. And even though, they're a competitor, TrahanArchitects.com as well. So again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.